German grammar. Oh my God! Maybe you're just like me. Maybe you've always had a burning desire to learn a language. Or maybe you just needed to learn a few words, phrases for a short trip you might be taking, so that way you can ask for directions, or maybe ask for a glass of water. In this video, you'll find out the top 3 biggest barriers that I had to face and the subsequent breakthroughs that helped me get through the process of learning German. I know you're thinking, German? Why German? Well, that's a story for a later time, later point in this video. Let's start with a talk generally about language. Language. Do you know that there are over 7,100 languages spoken in the world, and underlying those countless numbers of dialects? If I were to visit the South, for example, I'm in Southern California. If I were to visit the Deep South and had a conversation with someone living in the Deep South, I probably wouldn't understand a word that person was saying. Maybe one choice word. And if they used that word, we'd have trouble. But everything else would seem foreign to me. Yet, we would be speaking the exact same language. And that's the fascinating part about language. Language is alive. It's an ever-evolving, malleable form of communication that is as complex as the culture it represents. If you ask me, language as to culture is a soul as it is to a person or a human being. Language is the soul of a culture. Now let's talk about some of the biggest barriers that I had to face while learning German. Now, my first barrier happened in the beginning. I remember in the 9th grade, on my way to college, aspiring to be there, there were set curriculums, number of classes that you had to take. And 2 of those years, you had to take a foreign language in order to qualify and enter into the Southern California University system. I had aspired to go to UCLA, or maybe USC at the time, but UCLA was my number 1 choice coming out of Inglewood High School. So anyway, the registration process was new to me as a freshman, and I didn't have much guidance at the time, academically. So invariably, I had a couple classes that were missing that I needed to add over my freshman year. My foreign language was one of them. So I showed up to Spanish, attempting to add the class. And when I walked in the room, there was standing room only, and people were all along the backside. When I walked into French, the classroom was smaller and the scenario was worse. There were more people standing and more people waiting. And in both scenarios, the teacher said to me, I would love to get you in this class, but I think the chances of you getting in on this list I'm looking at are pretty slim. So on my way to my 3rd language, and thank goodness we had a 3rd language, I headed on my way over to the German classroom. And halfway along the way, I noticed there was fanfare, lights. People were giving out stuff. There were balloons. There was even tea and cookies. They wanted my business, and I was very happy to give it to them. Once enrolled in that class, there were about 10 of us. And after we started the curriculum, as the weeks started moving forward, I came up against my very first barrier. And the barrier is this. The barrier was me trying to fit an entirely new language into the context of the language that I already knew. I was trying to force German and the laws of physics that existed in that universe. I was trying to force it into my contextual understanding of how I understood and spoke the language of English. it gave me a bit of trouble. Obviously, learning their vocabulary was not too hard. One-to-one translations of a word are pretty easy to receive for someone learning. The second portion of it was learning the alphabet. It's a little bit tricky, the pronunciation of each individual letter, and also adding a few others. There are other languages and alphabets that are way more complex than ours. German is kind of similar, but there were 2 or 3 other characters, like an S, a double S. They call it scharfes S. And then there are words or vowels with 2 dots on the top of these letters, and they're called umlauts, and it changes the connotation or the pronunciation of that vowel. So these are some of the things you had to adjust to, but they were pretty easy for me conceptually. But the problem of existing in this universe and adhering to the laws of language that existed in English, and then attempting to use those same laws on another language, was a non-starter. How did I break through? What I started doing is, after I got a grasp of the words and conversational phrases, and my memory is pretty good, so in that area I was doing okay, I started taking sentences that were giving me trouble, and I was breaking them down literally, not translating German into English, but forcing English to fit into the construct of German. That was my breakthrough. How did I do it? So let me help you. If this helps you, I mean, then I'm done with, well, there's more to come, but if this helps you, I've done my job. What I did was, I started to translate literally sentences from German into English. Do not translate the language into your current language. Translate your language literally the other way. Take the sentence from that universe and do not turn it into English. Leave it the way it is, but then assign each word literally what it means and then read it accordingly. It's going to be very difficult to digest it. Why? Because it is a totally different universe. In another language, how they construct, how they communicate, that's perfectly fair and acceptable. That actually is the right way to think. It's how they think is what I started to tap into. That was my number one problem and my number one breakthrough. That was my first year. Let's fast forward to my second year. My second year, my biggest problem in my second year was not having anyone to speak to. I know it seems so simple. Because why? You may be learning Spanish, and if you're in Southern California, there's a joke that goes along with that. I'm on an elevator, is the joke, and 2 guys are on the elevator with me, and they're speaking Mandarin. And halfway through the ride, I get upset, and I say, hey, we're in Southern California, we're in America. Speak Spanish. And so that's the joke, man. You're in California. If you're learning Spanish, it is almost a no-brainer. And if you don't learn Spanish, it is completely your fault. It is a culture that has been merged along with the English culture because of our proximity and our history. The languages as well have been merged. Half the streets in Los Angeles or more are Hispanic words. So the problem of learning Spanish and finding someone to speak to, for example, in Southern California doesn't exist. But for German and for me, it was a big problem. Outside of the small setting of school, which there were only 10 people in this class when I started in 9th grade. And after my first year, the numbers dwindled down a little bit further than that to maybe about 6 of us. And so there were only my professor on a daily basis, 5 days a week for maybe an hour, and a few people in my class during that hour, and that was it. There was nowhere else that I could exercise German in Southern California. So how did I break through? Because I was in this German thing, and I was in it, man. After my first year, second year, I got into it. I started becoming conversational and I could comprehend a great deal of what was being said to me. And people around me who knew that I had, pursuits to go into college and I was doing good in school, family and friends became aware of me going through this process of learning German. And in that, I had my breakthrough. They started asking me, it was almost a joke. What's this? What's that? Could you tell me about this? And so my process of learning German and having people to talk to or talk with was the dynamics changed when people after a while realized that I was serious and I was doing this and I was studying this. It became something they asked me about. My mom in particular was one of those people. When it came to language, we were happy to encounter each other on an ongoing basis. And her fascination in me learning this language gave me someplace else to use it. So that's how I conquered my second problem and barrier. The third, number 3, a problem or a thing or a barrier that I would not place in front of my worst enemy would be the barrier of learning German grammar. Oh my God! And I rarely use that phrase, man. But in this case, Lord God, I needed to call him because the psychological barrier that English presented and how difficult German was, it was an insurmountable barrier for me. And I could not get past it. There were brief moments of clarity and understanding in which I thought I had it. And I was getting right answers on tests and quizzes when you had to conjugate a verb. You, me, I, so on and so forth, we, they. I was starting to get it. But just imagine, as complex as English is, and it is, they say, one of the most difficult languages to speak, adding, as German has, a feminine version, a masculine version, and a neuter version for every single noun. A dog wasn't just a dog. A dog had to be prefixed with der, die, or das, which was either der masculine, die feminine, or das, which was neutral. On top of this, which means that you had to figure out how to conjugate not just the word, but also the tense of the femininity, masculinity, or it being a neutral noun. On top of that, there was a version of German called Hochdeutsch, which is High Deutsch, or what we would term as grammatically spoken English, as proper English. And then there was a casual form of German, which was casual German. And all of these variables, depending on who you were talking to, whether it be formal or informal, whether it be male or female, or whether the object you were referring to was either male, female, or neutral. This was the monster of German grammar. How did I break through? I really couldn't tell you what happened. I could probably refer to it. I don't know how it happened, but I could certainly tell you when it happened. My breakthrough happened my third year. Halfway through the year, mind you. And the only reason I came back my third year, after my second year, I was done fulfilling my requirement. And I had washed my hands of the entire problem of German, ready to leave and never return. Sayonara. But on the way out, my German teacher, that happened to be also my English teacher, her name was Frau Vukolich, Mrs. Vukolich. Frau is how you refer to a woman in an elderly woman that you respect, is like Mrs. Frau Vukelic. So we would call her Frau, as in Mrs., and her last name was Vukelic. The name doesn't sound like someone that would get up on you or even become your friend, but she became way more than that. Frau Vukelic, on my way out, my sophomore year, after completing the course with a B, I was always a good student, she said to me, Ron, are you coming back next year? And I told her, no, I'm not coming back. Are you crazy? She reached over and she touched my hand. And till this day, I remember the soft touch and the love that she expressed in that moment. She said to me, Ron, you were so close. She said, don't stop now. And because of that touch, that deep gaze into my eye, and I already knew this woman. She was a genuinely good person already. I've been with her for 2 years as a teacher. I found out at that moment, a moment that I had never had with any other teacher in my life, that she cared for me. Frau Vukelic cared for us. And because of that love that I felt at that moment and her connection with me, I decided to enroll into yet another year of pain and anguish with German. So halfway through my 3rd year, I'm still struggling with this German grammar, but I'm getting a hold of it. You know how you're in a fight and you almost got the guy in a headlock? This is for guys, people that fight and watch MMA. It's called it when you get it locked. You can have your hand around, but you can't really get it in to choke the guy out. My 3rd year, halfway through, I got a lock on the grammar. And it didn't happen consciously. It happened subconsciously. It happened overnight. It happened in a dream. I had spent the night, gotten up, getting ready for school. Meanwhile, I was doing everything else in school, extracurricular activities, basketball. I was busy. So I got up early again this morning, having to get together and make my way to school. And I remember having a dream. Because we often forget our dreams once we come back to consciousness. But some of these dreams we remember, or portions of it. And I remembered this dream. And while I'm brushing my teeth, I'm going, hold on, I dreamt last night. And something dawned on me. I dreamt in German. I remember dreaming, maybe not the whole dream. I didn't remember the entire dream. But I remembered dreaming in German. And they say you're not really under or within or have mastered a language. Even people that have learned multiple languages go through this as well as they move from one language culturally to the next. Maybe they left that country and they came to or went to another country. And it takes them a period of time before they start speaking the other language. But how they know they've been completely immersed, they will tell you. I now start to dream in the language that I'm immersed in. I speak both languages, but when I'm here in Africa, after I'm here for 3 weeks, I stop dreaming in English and I start dreaming in the South African language. I had a breakthrough. My breakthrough was when I was sleeping, and it makes sense because the barriers that we construct are completely subconscious psychological barriers. We're not in control of them. And we surely cannot put them up, erect them, and bring them or destroy them at a flick or snap of your finger. The first part is getting to know it's there in the first place. And even when you know it's there, it's damn near impossible to rid yourself of psychological programming. The barrier of psychology was the one I defeated. And it was because I had spent countless hours trying to learn a language over a period of 3. At that time, it was 2.5 years, even though I was 3 years into it. I was in my junior year. 2.5 years, constantly repeating this language, the phrases, getting to become conversational, speaking with people, And then ultimately, because I couldn't defeat this thing on my own consciously, my mind said, don't worry, I got you. And that night the breakthrough came through. I'm hoping that you get where I'm really going with this. It's not really about the language. It's about the psychological barriers that we have placed ourselves and that have been instilled and placed by others. What are these barriers that exist inside of you? What are these debilitating boundaries about life, money, relationships, people, things that live and dwell inside of you that you are completely unaware of, that they are there preventing you? And all it takes is just a sidestep, maybe a reach up over, maybe someone reaches down and pulls you up and gives you a start, a contextual understanding of the universe, the subconscious universe that's going on inside of you, and begin the work of tearing those walls down so then you can become who you need to be completely and fully to self-actualize as a person. So before I go, I'm going to leave you with this, something light, airy, and bubbly. They say that language is 80% nonverbal, 20% is spoken, and the other 80% is the perception, the attitude, the gestures, the facial expressions that we pick up off someone. And if that's the case, the 80% is universal. You already speak 80% of all languages. All you have is 20% left. Okay, I don't know. But seriously though, to sum it all up in regards to language and barriers, my third year was complete. My fourth year, I re-enrolled back into German. So it was a fourth year. And that year, we were doing compositions, reading and writing paragraphs and sections of books and translating, those types of things. The basic building blocks had been put in place, and I had made it past my barriers. I went on to college, and my major as a political science major, I added an emphasis. It was in international relations. My political science degree is an international political science degree. The reason being is because of my background in language. I had to satisfy another requirement to get my BA in international relations, and that was satisfying the requirement of language. I had to take, once again, another 2 years. It was ultimately 3. So in total, I studied German for a total of 7 years. I know you wouldn't wish it on an enemy, and I don't wish it on you. I don't wish it takes you that long to learn a language. It'll take you a lot less time, especially if you take heed to those 3 things that I mentioned to you in the beginning. You know what I mean? The mind state of transferring one universe into the other. The second, having people to talk to. And third, the grammar of a language, understanding the language through its culture. That's the best way to learn a language. Best way to learn about you too and your psychological problems is to first be aware of that. Some of them may exist. And if you need help, reach out. There are people designed to help you through these problems. Some like me with the basic barriers, conversation. But then there are others for deeper psychological barriers that you may have. Seek them out. It's about making you better. It's about the legacy of learning. Take today as another opportunity to add to your legacy. So much so that you add something every day, every week, and so forth until it becomes something you're remembered for. And when you get there, reach back for one of us. You guys take care. I'm Ron Raphael.